Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the last few years. They are still a relatively new addition to the Swedish beer scene, but they've built a very strong reputation for themselves in that short period of time, I have to say. If people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they're best known for their different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs, but they have been experimenting a little bit in recent times with lagers, and the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases, and it's a style that we haven't had from them before. It is, however, a style that I very much enjoy, and I have to say I've heard very good things about this one. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up toward Örebro once again, which is out to the west of Stockholm, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from Apex Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called Death Grip. It comes in at 7.5% ABV, and this one is a West Coast IPA. So yeah, this beer has not been released in Sweden yet. I bought this one at Beer Hive in Amar in Copenhagen, and they always have a good selection of Swedish stuff as well as the Danish things. It tends to be more the Danish stuff I go there to pick up, but you know, when I saw that these guys had this one, I really wanted to try it because I wasn't sure when it was going to be released through Sweden, and I don't think it has been yet actually. But yeah, a 7.5% West Coast IPA, our first West Coast IPA from Apex Brewing Company. So this should hopefully be very, very nice. So yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it's all about. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Apex Brewing Company before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated. And remember that you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go into the channel homepage, use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, province, prefecture in there, whatever you like, and if I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many other things, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from different countries as well. There's many playlists in there, so go in and knock yourself out, just have a little look. But yeah, let's go on to the brewery notes then and have a wee look at Apex Brewing Company. So, Apex Brewing Company, as I've told you before, were originally based in Nora, which is to the north of Örebro, and this company was founded back in 2017 by Daniel Gatchitz and Niklas Lundgren. So both of these guys are musicians, with Niklas having played in the band 59 Times the Pain, whereas Daniel played in The Voice of a Generation. But Daniel and Niklas are responsible for the brewing operations of the company, but there are a few others involved in it as well. So there's Leif Karlsson, Ola Eriksson and Roger Hjelm, and together they basically take care of the bureaucracy side of things. But the brewery started off with a 500 litre brew kit and 6 fermentation tanks, and they started off just selling the beer in the local area before they got it into Systembolaget, and I believe that came in about 2018, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So the first beer that these guys released was the Single Hop IPA, a Citra New England IPA, and that was very good. We reviewed that on the channel not long after it was released, if I remember correctly. But over the course of 2018, they brewed around 35,000 litres of beer with about 25 different varieties, all of which were New England hazy IPAs, and then they expanded the next year and brewed about 120,000 litres across 2019. Over the following years they continued to develop new recipes and get their beers out there a little bit more, build up their customer base, and then in the summer of 2021 they announced that they would move to a new premises in the Baytorp district of Örebro in that autumn. So when they moved there, they upgraded their 500 litre brew kit to a 2,000 litre system and added several new tanks in there, and they've continued to develop their sales portfolio and develop new recipes and things over the last while as well. But yeah, as of April 2023, when we're filming this review for you, these guys have produced 150 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. Like I said to you, the vast majority of them are New England hazy IPAs, but they have got a few lagers in there that they've been playing with as well. They usually do Keller lagers, the Pilsner, There's been the Keller Pils, the Keller Dunkel, and a few other ones as well. I think there was a Keller Bock, if I remember rightly. But yeah, they've been doing some really interesting stuff in recent times, I have to say. But this is the first time they've released a West Coast IPA. But yeah, I think that's everything we can really tell you about Apex Brewing Company for the moment. So if you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all of the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's go on then and actually have a little look at this beer itself. So we can get rid of my brewery notes in just a second. I'll let you have a wee look at the artwork on this one. It is a wee bit different compared to what we've seen from Apex Brewing Company before. It changes from the theme. Usually they have the kind of Illuminati type sign with the different animals and stuff like that on it, but you can see plain silver top on this one. This is a 40ml can. This beer cost me 60 Danish kroner, which is probably in the region of about 85 Swedish, so about €8.50. Maybe about £7.50 sterling, about that's probably going to be about $9 American, something like that. But yeah, 7.5% West Coast IPA, this one. You can see on the back here, here is the Apex Brewing Company symbol, and one of their usual slogans: music, people, and beer. But yeah, a 7.5% West Coast IPA, this one. It does look very, very nice. But yeah, the hops in this one are Columbus and Simcoe, which have been added in the kettle. We know these hops quite well. Columbus, about 14% alpha acid American. It tends to give you this big kind of spicy floral note. Simcoe will give you a more oily passion fruity character. Again, it's about it's American and 12% alpha acid roughly. And then they've added Citra and Strata in the dry hopping stage. So both of these hops American, both 14% alpha acid roughly. Citra is going to give you a nice kind of big oily mango note with a bit of passion fruit and pineapple, a bit of passion fruit and grapefruit behind it, but also a bit of a lemon limey character in a West Coast IPA. And then Strata is going to give you quite an oily strawberry type character from what I remember. But yeah, the malt base in this one is pale, Munich and light caramel, quite straightforward. So yeah, I think that's everything we need to actually tell you about the beer itself, so we can open it up and have a look at it. So let's do this. Been looking forward to trying this one for quite a wee while. Incidentally, I believe this beer was first released back in late February, early March, if I'm not mistaken. But of course, Jessica at Beer Hive in Amar kept this one aside for me. I forgot to go and pick my beers up before I went off to Japan. But yeah, this was the one of the ones that I was really looking forward to. So we are drinking this one a little bit less fresh than it might have been otherwise, but yeah, I'm sure it will still be in pretty good condition. West Coast IPAs can stand the test of time for a little while, of course. But yeah, anyway, as you can see, this beer does look very nice. So before the head disappears, we can see that this beer is poured with about a finger and a half of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head there. So there are a few kind of bumpy bits toward the top of the head, but you've got some nice foamy bubbles in there as well. I'll just let you have a wee look at this one. But I think it is fair to say it's more of a kind of cream coloured head that this beer has, rather than being perfect white. But it certainly looks very nice. In terms of the colour of the beer, I would say when I shine the natural light through this, it's actually quite a... It's got a little tiny hint of amber to it, but it's actually mainly a kind of quite rich yellow colour more than anything else. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer as well. But yeah, this one, I don't think well, with any IPA, you don't often really have to care about barrel aging and adjuncts and things like that. But yeah, the Munich malts and the light caramel in this one are probably mainly what is giving it its yellow colour, actually. But yeah, a little bit of natural haze to this one, which you kind of expect from the West Coast IPAs. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look very, very nice, I have to say. Yeah, but nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when we consider what style it is. I think we can leave it at that for the appearance side of this beer, and we can go on and have a wee look at the aroma. So let's do this and see what it's all about. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So, straight away with this one, you kind of get everything that you'd really expect from the West Coast IPA. You've got a little bit of malty sweetness in there, you've got a bit of a deeper green component to it, and you've also got some nice oily, fruity characters in there. Yeah, it's quite tropical leaning, this one, I would say. But yeah, it is pretty good. So for me, as I've always said, there are two ways West Coast IPAs can go. They can be the more oily and caramelly sort, such as Sierra Nevada Torpedo, or they can be the more kind of bready and biscuity sort, such as Russian River, Russian River's Pliny the Elder. Those are two of the kind of benchmarks for me. So this one, it really is more of a kind of bready and biscuity example. So it leans a little bit more towards the kind of Pliny side of the spectrum when it comes to the West Coast IPA flavour profile. But it does come across very, very nicely. So in terms of the, this one for me, it almost has it reminds me of a few of the German brewed West Coast IPAs that I've had actually. So yeah, but when it's got the Munich malt in there, that kind of makes sense. It's almost like I'm stating the obvious. But yeah, I mean, aroma wise, this beer is pretty damn nice actually in that sense. So let's try and break it down and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. So on top of the or the backbone of the beer, I should say, you've got that lovely little bit of kind of fresh white bready bread crust in there. You can smell that just forming the backbone of the beer. There's a tiny little bit of woodiness in there, and you do have a few kind of crackery elements to it. Those are, these are quite common things, regardless of what kind of IPA you have. It's usually the pale malt that will give you these kind of notes. But yeah, definitely a little bit of kind of fresh white bready bread crust, a little bit of woodiness, and also a wee bit of cracker. So yeah, I like that about the aroma of this beer, definitely. So on top of the bread crusty kind of notes, on top of the kind of the crackery notes, you start to get some of the actual bread out of this beer, and I feel that this beer has a little bit of like a kind of fresh wholemeal brown bready type character coming out of it too, which is nice. So there's a little bit of that going on, and then you start to get the fluffy white bready notes, which I think will be the Munich malts actually. So I'm getting quite a little bit of that coming out of this beer. So yeah, absolutely. Fresh white bread crust, a little bit of cracker, a little bit of wood. You've also got that little bit of kind of brown bready sort of thing, white bready character above it as well. And then yeah, you start to get some of the sweetness out of the malt base of the beer too. So yeah, in the middle of the nose with this beer, you absolutely get a little bit of a kind of straight up sweet caramel coming out of it. So yeah, straight up sweet caramel in there, but also a little bit of a more kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing to the beer too, which I certainly enjoy. Yeah, I really do like how that goes together. The malt base in this one, it's very straightforward actually. Only 3 types of malts in this one: pale ale, a bit of Munich, and they said a little bit of light caramel in there. So yeah, kind of makes sense the aroma that we're getting out of this one, to be honest with you. But as I say, overall this one really leans toward a more kind of Pliny the Elder type IPA. I think that's definitely fair to say. Yeah, I think that's probably everything that we really need to say about the malty side of this beer, to be quite honest. On the hoppy side of things then, we'll start off with the green component. The hoppy character in this beer isn't quite as deep and dying as I thought it was going to be, so I wonder if this is going to be a more kind of modern interpretation of the West Coast IPA, because the thing you need to remember these days is that many newer craft beer drinkers came in to drinking IPAs with the lower IBU New England's, whereas me back in the day it was the kind of 80, 90 IBU West Coast IPAs that we started drinking. So yeah, West Coast IPAs have gradually lost a little bit of their IBU over the years. So when it comes to IPAs, there are 3 different kinds of hoppings that you'll use. Assuming that you have a 90-minute wort boil, just to give the example, You have early addition hopping, which will take place within the first hour of the wort boil. That gives you mainly bitterness. You know, it's simple chemistry. You've got more, simple chemistry. You've got a longer time to extract the chemicals, and yeah, that kind of comes out there. So yeah, you get more bitterness there. That translates to a more deep and kind of dank aroma. Then you've got late addition hopping, which will take place within the last half hour of the wort boil. It gives you a brighter green component with also a good little bit of grassiness and things in there, and you'll get a brighter green component in the aroma, as we said. But then you've got dry hopping, which takes place after the wort boil is complete, and that gives you all flavour and aroma from those hops, to be honest with you. But yeah, West Coast IPAs tend to use all three kinds of hopping, whereas New England IPAs tend to rely on the latter two. That's definitely fair to say. But yeah, with this beer, the green component, it does have a little bit of depth and dankness to it, but not too much. And I would have expected a little bit more when Columbus is in the mix, because Columbus and Chinook were always your classic bittering hops. You know, you would put those in, and they would give you, you'd get the big piney resins from the Chinook and the more floral spicy character from the Columbus. But for me, this one, it does have a little bit of a deeper floral character to it, but it doesn't have the big kind of spicy floral notes I would have expected of Columbus. So I wonder if they're adding these hops later on during the wort boil. So that's something to think about. But yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting to consider, of course. But yeah, on the green component, you do have a little tiny touch of earthiness there, but like I say, quite a bright but slightly more oily floral component, and quite a wee bit of zesty grassiness coming out of this one too, actually, which is interesting. Yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the green component, to be honest with you. We can focus on the fruity side of the beer just to round off the aroma. So for me, there's a little bit of kind of great. There is a little bit of a grapefruity note to it. There's also that little bit of passion fruity character in there. You do have the grapefruit isn't too strong. It's more like an oily passion fruit, I would say, but lots of kind of big mango-y characters in this one. And of course, the passion fruit and the mango, they're going to come from the Citra and the Simcoe, definitely. Columbus isn't really going to give you much in the way of fruity contributions in this beer, I would say. But on the on top of that, there's a little bit of on top of that, as I say, you have a little bit of you've got oily passion fruit in there, you've got big juicy kind of mangoes, and then you do get a little bit of a kind of apricot-y and kind of pineapple note out of this one too. But then you start to get a little bit of a lychee character, and you can smell the kind of strawberry notes from the Strata at the front of the nose with this beer as well. Strata's giving you that big strawberry note, but I think the Strata's also bringing out the kind of gooseberry and lychee type qualities that Citra can have in a West Coast IPA. And this is the interesting thing, you know, hops will behave in different ways depending on what malts they're used with and what yeasts and things they're used with as well. So in a West Coast IPA, Citra's going to give you more of that gooseberry lychee type thing, whereas in a New England, it's going to give you more of a kind of lemon limey character, at least I've found. So yeah, for me, this beer is showing you more of that kind of lychee and gooseberry note from the Citra, but then you've got the wet kind of strawberry characters sitting above it as well. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is quite nice, I have to say. I like how this beer goes about its business. Yeah, really interesting, this one. It definitely smells a little bit more like a kind of modern take on the West Coast IPA. But yeah, it certainly has me very curious anyway. So we'll get the rest of it out into the glass, but let's have a look at this. This is the Death Crip West Coast IPA at 7.5% ABV from Apex Brewing Company in Örebro here in Sweden. Let's do this. Slange, skål, cheers. Yeah, it's pretty nice. I mean, you can. One thing I will say about this is that this beer has a lot more bitterness to it than the aroma would have you believe. That's one of the things. And one thing I always have to keep in mind is that, you know, your palate and your aroma senses are always changing because beer is, you know, constantly evolving. But this beer, it certainly does have quite a bit of the bitterness that you would expect from the old school West Coast IPAs. So I wasn't expecting that out of the, just from the aroma of this beer, as you saw. So the malty side of this beer is really nice as well. Like this beer, I would say it's very well rounded. I mean, it gives you kind of everything you would want from the style. You've got the big kind of bitter green component to it. You've got a bit of the breadiness and sweetness in the malt base, and then you've got the oily fruits. So yeah, the way this beer goes together, I think, is really, really nice. It gets a big thumbs up from me. Yeah. Yeah, I like this one. So I'm going to say a good first effort at a West Coast IPA from Apex Brewing Co. I do hope they do more of these and maybe try some West Coast doubles and triples and things like that, because they've got, if this is their first effort, I think they've done pretty damn well with that. I'd be curious to know how many pilot batches and stuff like that they did for this one, but this is good. So let's break this beer down and describe it for you then, as we always do. Middle third of your palate. You've got a nice little bit of a kind of, you do have a nice little bit of a fresh kind of white bready bread crust just forming the backbone of this beer, and it does get a little bit drier the further into the aftertaste that you go. But further forward on that middle third of your palate, you get a little touch of a kind of woody note coming out of the beer, which again I think is quite nice. So yeah, little touch of woodiness to this one for me. And then above that you've got a wee bit of Jacob's kind of cream cracker in there. And then you start to get the bready notes out of the beer. So for me, there's a layer of kind of wholemeal brown bread sitting on top of that Jacob's cream cracker. And that kind of builds in sweetness a little bit. You get more and more sweetness out of that the further into the aftertaste that you go. And above that, you start to get the white bready layer from the pale malt and the Munich malt and stuff like that. So yeah, you can feel there's this kind of fluffy white bready layer in there. And it does have a little bit, it almost has a little bit of another kind of bread crusty layer just on top of that before you get the brown sugary notes out of the beer. Yeah, so definitely more of a kind of bready and biscuity leaning West Coast IPA, this one, I have to say. So the bready notes that you get out of this beer, they do, as I say, they get a bit smoother and a bit sweeter, but also a little bit drier the further into the aftertaste that you go. But yeah, on top of the bready notes there, you get a little bit of a more it's interesting, the brown sugary notes in this. I can feel they're a little bit oily, but at the same time they show you a wee bit of dryness too. So let's take that. So above the kind of white bready layer, you start to get the brown sugary notes. So you can feel that there's a little bit of a kind of smooth brown sugary layer. It's almost like a little tiny touch leathery. So you can feel that forming the base of the brown sugary layer. But in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there's that little bit of an oily. You get that oily, sweet caramelly note coming out of this one. So yeah, you've got that oily, sweet caramelly note coming out of the beer, and that kind of covers the alcohol. It's 7.5%. It's not the heaviest of West Coast IPAs that you're going to come across, but it's not the lightest either. I mean, 7.2, 6.5 and 7.2 were the kind of two ABVs that I remember being quite prevalent when it came to this style. But yeah, 7% is a good mark, I think, to give you the enough maltiness from a West Coast IPA to balance it. But yeah, the oily kind of caramelly note there in the middle, that's covering the alcohol, and as you move further out from that, you get more of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity type note out of the beer, which I do enjoy. And then under that, you've just got a slightly kind of very, very, very slightly leathery brown sugar there, and then you've got the bready notes that we talked about earlier. To be honest, I think that covers what we need to say about the middle third of your palate in this beer. Quite nice actually. I do like that about this beer. I think we can go on to the back third of your palate then, and the layers in the back third of your palate are kind of similar, but they're just a little bit taller and more airy and stuff like this. So let's look at that. The border region between middle and back third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there, like a kind of mix of white and brown bread. Absolutely. So yeah, the mix of white and brown bread in there. On top of that, you've got a little bit of a more kind of, you can feel the bread crust in there. As I've always said, more dry and bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, whereas sweeter flavours come out further forward. So you can feel the bread crust in there in the base of that back third of the palate, but it's drier and more grainy. You've got the crackery note in there, which again is drier. And then you have the brown bready layer, which feels a little bit taller and a bit more airy, but again more dry than the white bready layer, the fluffy white bready layer, again taller and airy, but still dry. And above that, you just get this little bit of like spicy, bread crusty character that caps off the bread. And above everything else, you've got some of the more kind of yeasty flavours coming out of the beer. So there's like a slightly more white and brown, like a mix of white and brown farmhousey type bread in there. It's got a little bit of a kind of honeycomb and woody type flavour too, but that's the yeast that's giving you these things. They didn't say actually, it didn't say on the Untappd page. Usually Apex will put all the list, they'll put the list of all the ingredients and things on the Untappd page, but with this one they didn't say what yeast they'd used in this beer actually. But yeah, you can certainly feel a little bit of that woody, bready, yeasty character there, but definitely back third of the palate you can feel the flavour is taller. As you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So, yeah, I think we can move on to the hoppy side of this beer now. So, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there. That kind of lingers. So yeah, a good little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, you start to get a little bit of a kind of, a little bit of earthiness there. You get a little bit of a kind of herbal character as well. And then as you push further forward, you start to get more, you do get a little bit of that deep, dank pine resin note, but you can feel that it just gradually gets more and more floral and spicy. That's the Columbus that's going to do that, absolutely. So yeah, you get that nice big kind of Columbus spicy floral note in there, but round the front curve of the tongue, the beer is definitely lighter and more grassy. It's kind of an oily, grassy note, but a wee bit of a more zesty sort of thing too. But yeah, I do like how that pieces together. Yeah, we'll see with this one. It does, the bitterness in this beer certainly builds into the aftertaste, and that's one thing I'm happy about with this beer, is that it does display a bit more bitterness, because there are many West Coast IPAs these days that, you know, give you 30 or 40 IBUs, and for me, you know, you need more bitterness in a West Coast IPA, and that's what this style was created on, was having a bit more bitterness, and I think this one really does that. Let's look at the front third of your palate though, on the fruity side of the beer. So yeah, front third of your palate, for me, on that border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of kind of bready build up there. Then the base of that front third of your palate has a little bit more. It has the bread crust, but it's a bit smoother. Has a little bit of the brown bread, which is a little bit sweeter, and then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy, fruity esters kind of roll their way out of the beer. At the back of that front third of your palate, absolutely, there's a little bit of a stronger grapefruit, which is a kind of, it's almost like a trademark of the West Coast IPA. But when you move further forward from that, you do get a little bit of a more kind of mellow passion fruit, and that's going to come both from the Citra and from the Simcoe in this one. And you can feel that it mellows out to give you a little bit of a kind of lighter and slightly dry mango quality as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate. There's a wee touch of apricot and stuff underneath there, and maybe a wee tiny bit of a pineapple note, but for me, grapefruit, passion fruit, and then a drier mango quality. As you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, you start to see there's a little bit of like a lychee gooseberry type note, which I would say is down to the Citra, but you can feel on top of that there's a slightly more oily kind of strawberry note, which will be the Strata. The Strata will give you this kind of note. The Strata can give you a sort of melony and strawberry note, and in fairness, on the back half of that front third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a melony note. So yeah, there's grapefruit there, there's a soft and dry passion fruit mango, and then maybe a little bit of melon on top of that. But then yeah, as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, it's more about you've got the kind of lychee and gooseberry notes from the Citra, and also the wee bit of strawberry oily character from the Strata as well. So yeah. That's quite interesting, definitely. Yeah, so I have to say I do like how that goes together. On top of that, I don't think there's anything else we really need to say about the flavour of this beer. The only other thing you could maybe add is that there's a wee bit of a limey, like a big oily limey zesty kind of thing, just behind the front tip of the front curve of your palate, where you get the more grassy notes, and that builds a good border between the fruits and the kind of green component of the beer. So yeah, I think that covers the flavour. Mouthfeel wise, this is kind of what you'd expect. It's pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied. The carbonation is very, very smooth. Nice little bit of oily mouthfeel to this one. As I said earlier, this beer has the IBUs that you would expect of a West Coast IPA. I think this is probably about 80 or 90. It feels as if it's pushing that way. You get more bitterness out of it the more that you drink. But yeah, as I say, I do like how that goes together in this one. The malt base has a little bit of dry crustiness underneath. You've also got the dry kind of crusty bready character underneath, but you've also got the kind of brown bready notes in there, and you've got a wee bit of sweetness on top of that. It's very like some of the German brewed West Coast IPAs that I've had in the past, so I like that kind of Germany bready character that this one has. Definitely more of a kind of bready and biscuity type West Coast IPA rather than being oily and caramelly. We've said about the 80-ish IBUs, and then you've got a nice oily fruity character to this one. The darker, stronger grapefruit and things in there, but also the lighter, more mellow fruits coming out of it too. But all in all, I would say that this is a very solid first effort when it comes to West Coast IPAs from Apex Brewing Company. I'm sure these guys can refine this and play around with it and do more things with it too. So I look forward to seeing what these guys do within the West Coast IPA category a little bit later on. But I think this is a very, very nice beer actually, so it gets a big thumbs up from me. This is one of the most true to style West Coast IPAs I've had in quite a wee while, I have to say. So for that, I think Apex deserve a bit of credit. And I saw that it wasn't madly highly rated on Untappd. I mean, it's I think it had 3.7 or 3.8, and this, in my opinion, this one, I don't often comment on Untappd ratings, but this one should be a little bit higher, because this is a bit more true to what the West Coast IPA was back in 2013 when I started the channel. This is really a bit more what it was like. It has the bigger bitterness, which is what you want. But yeah, that's a bit of food for thought as well with this one. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this beer. This was the Death Grip, a West Coast IPA at 7% ABV from Apex Brewing Company in Örebro here in Sweden. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Apex Brewing Company as well. And we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But until then, Slàinte, Skål, cheers, see you guys in the next review.